Bob Jackson was a simple man. All he wanted was to live a life without worries, have a wife, kids, a nice home, and a toy or two. Bob drove a Ford F-150 that his father left him when he passed away. That was 10 years ago, and the car was 15 years old at the time. Bob's dad was a carpenter and farmer, and his mom worked as a maid at the Route 66 hotel near Bells, Tennessee. Bob grew up in Bells. In Bells, Bob lived a typical small-town life. Bells was so small that when you saw the Welcome to Bells sign, the back of the sign said, "Thank you for visiting." Bob attended elementary school, middle school, high school, and the mini market in Bells, all in the same building. Bob's nickname was BJ, and the only thing that kept Bob from being bullied was his sister Carrie. Carrie's boyfriend was a local gangster, and as a consequence, his girlfriend's brother was off limits. But as I said, Bob wanted the simple life. School was normal for Bob. He had a few friends, a girlfriend, and a bucket, cheap car that he used to get from point A to point B, or maybe point C if he was set up. The one thing Bob did great was hunting. Bob had had a gun in his hand since he learned to walk. Okay, stumble, so what if it was a cap gun? So when an army recruiter came to town, he talked Bob into becoming an army ranger. Bob's father was not happy, but realized that Bob should choose his own path in life. After graduating from high school, Bob enlisted in the army. He was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. When the sergeant first saw Bob, he told him, "Get back on the bus and go home. Ranger school is for adults, not little boys." Bob was just over 170 centimeters tall and weighed about 1.5 pounds. But that didn't bother Bob. He was used to people underestimating him. After the first night in the field, the sergeant never underestimated Bob again. The sergeant decided to sneak up on Bob, but instead he started looking at the barrel of Bob's M16. It was 3 in the morning, and Bob was the only one who could hear the sergeant moving through the woods. By the end of Ranger School, Bob was ranked first in his class. Bob was proud of his parents. As time went on and toward the end of his service, Bob had a chance to go to war. Bob was sent on missions that made you wonder where the hell he was. But Bob kept to himself and never told anyone anything. While at his last duty station, Bob earned an accounting degree in his spare time. That's where he met Brenda. Brenda was a very pretty woman. She was about 5 feet 10 inches, 103 pounds, with brown hair and hazel eyes. Brenda attracted attention wherever she went. Brenda was sexy, and she knew it. All the Eddas, Eddies, and Eddies on base and in town offered Brenda their services. But Brenda was looking for a certain type of man, quiet, calm, and finally someone she could control. When Brenda met Bob, she realized she had found the perfect match. The only problem was that Bob knew she was out of his league and behaved accordingly. When Brenda smiled at Bob, he looked away. When Brenda approached Bob, he would walk away. Finally, one day, Bob found himself in the chapel waiting for Saturday, Massachusetts. When Brenda saw Bob, she realized she had to act quickly to get there before he saw her. Brenda sat down in the pew behind Bob, and no sooner had she touched his shoulder than Bob said, "Yes, what can I do for you?" This confused Brenda a little, because she didn't realize that he was aware of her presence. As soon as Brenda smiled, Bob's heart melted, and that was the end of it. That was all it took to start their romantic relationship. From that moment on, they became a couple. When Bob brought Brenda home to introduce her to his family, they were absolutely thrilled. Brenda had an MBA, was first in her class, and she also spoke 4 languages. At Bells, the whole town wondered how Bob had gotten so lucky. Remember, Bells is a very small town, population about 225. Bob's father was happy for his son, but told him, "Be on your guard, son. When you have a woman like that, you always have to be on your guard. Be sure you treat her right and love her the way she needs to be loved. But never let her neglect you. It's okay if you don't give her everything. Sometimes you have to stand up and say no." Bob made a promise to his father that day, and he always kept his promises. Time flew by, 10 years passed in the blink of an eye. Bob had a nice little auditing business, and Brenda was a mid-level sales manager for a large department store. They had no children and were the perfect married couple. In Bob's opinion, everything was going perfectly. Bob was just finishing up an audit at a client's factory when he decided to stop by Brenda's office and see if she wanted to go to lunch. Bob had never been in Brenda's office before. He didn't want to disturb her work, but she had never called his office either. She would call him or leave a message at home to warn him if she was going to be late. After figuring out where Brenda's office was, he approached her secretary, whose desk was outside her office, in the hallway. "Who are you?" Brenda's secretary asked him as he stopped in front of her desk. "I'm Brenda's husband," he informed her. She laughed and told him, "Move along." Brenda's husband is 6 feet, blonde, good-looking, and works upstairs. "Would you mind bothering Mrs. Jackson right now? I'm sure we can work things out." Instead, the secretary called security. When the guards arrived on the scene, they grabbed Bob to escort him out of the building. At that moment, Brenda, unaware that her real husband was being treated like he was some kind of psycho, came out of her office holding hands with the very guy the secretary had described. Brenda was shocked, but didn't say or do anything as Bob was led away. Brenda never thought Bob would ever find out about her and her boyfriend, Don. Everyone at work was sure they were married, but now things were out of control. As soon as Bob was escorted out of the building, he immediately headed home to pack his things. Bob was crushed, but at the same time he was realistic. Bob realized that the affair with Brenda had to be long-term. If people at work thought she was married to this guy, it had to last for a while. As he was driving home, his cell phone rang. Judging by the caller ID, it was Brenda's cell phone. He didn't bother to answer it, but the phone kept ringing. Bob threw the phone out the window and continued driving. When he got home, he started packing and thinking. Bob finally realized why Brenda didn't want children. At least not his. The thought saddened him, but it didn't change anything. She had made a cuckold out of him, and he couldn't live with that. "Can you imagine that?" Brenda's secretary told her. "This bland little worthless guy came up to me and claimed he was your husband. He was just delusional." They laughed at the thought of Brenda and Bob. "I don't know what to say. I don't want to brag, but honestly." In his dreams, agreed Brenda. It occurred to Brenda that she had always felt out of place with Bob. After all, Bob was a simpleton and had served his time. Brenda finished the rest of her day at work and headed home. She had no idea what to do. She had messed up, and now he knew what was going on. But she was sure Bob would listen to her and could come up with some lie that he would accept. When she pulled up to the house, Bob's car was parked in its usual spot. Brenda opened the door and called out to Bob. Nothing, it was eerily quiet. Brenda looked all around the house. Bob was gone. But Brenda didn't cry, didn't think about it. In her eyes, Bob had served his time and now something bigger, better was waiting for her. She was even glad she didn't have to explain the reality of the situation to him. 2 weeks later, when she was having lunch with Don, her work husband, and several vice presidents of the company, a man dressed as a waiter approached her. "Are you Brenda Jackson?" the man posing as a waiter asked. "Yes," she replied, curious but not particularly worried. The man handed her a bag and said, "You've been served." Brenda blushed, grabbed the envelope and ran to the ladies' room. Brenda was mad as hell. How could Bob do this so quickly? And what a nerve to serve her lunch in front of everyone. By the time she returned from the restroom, Don had already cleaned up. He told the vice presidents that it was an insurance claim. Brenda was glad Don was there for her. 3 months later, Brenda was sitting in her attorney's office going over the divorce papers. Bob hadn't asked her for anything, but there were some things Brenda had learned on her own. Well, Bob's lawyer explained Bob sold his company. That got Brenda's attention. "What? Who did he sell his company to?" she asked. "To his sister Carrie, I believe," he replied calmly. "For how much?" she asked. "For $2, you'll get a check for your share in the mail as soon as the divorce is finalized," he informed her with a small smirk on his face. "How can he do that?" she asked her attorney. "This company is common property, and half of it belongs to me. How dare he? And where is he even located? Why isn't he here?" she continued, her voice getting louder and louder. Bob's lawyer looked at Brenda and laughed, then picked up his briefcase, handed his business card to her lawyer, and walked out of the office. About that time, Bob returned home to his father's old house in Bells and listened to an offer on the property. Since his father had passed away, he and Carrie had owned the farm. There were rumors that Nissan was going to open a plant somewhere in Tennessee. The vice president in charge of Nissan's development talked to Bob about building a plant in Bells on Bob and Carrie's property. The farm was just over 200 acres, so it was exactly the size Nissan was looking for. Combined with easy access to the freeway and the fact that there was already a railroad track on one side of the land, it was the perfect location. Everyone in the town realized how advantageous it was, as Nissan's construction of a new assembly plant in Bells would attract other businesses to the area. Bob and Carrie agreed to the deal, offering a price of $35,000 to be split between them. Nissan even entered into a 6-year consulting agreement with Carrie's firm. Bob, the vice president, asked after they signed the land sale agreement, "What are your plans after you sell the business?" I haven't thought about what I'll be doing in the near future yet." "Why do you ask?" "Bob, we at Nissan have done some due diligence, including looking into your background. We wanted to know if you would be interested in becoming the new head of accounting at the plant." "I think I would be very interested. Of course, I'd have to learn the whole package of services Nissan offers. But I'm leaning towards saying yes," Bob agreed. Meanwhile, Brenda and Don received information that Nissan was building a plant in Bells. Brenda and Don envisioned themselves as the new power couple of Bells. But for this to happen, Brenda needed a divorce. She decided to accept Bob's settlement and hasten the divorce. She asked her attorney to get the case through the court system as quickly as he could, and 45 days later, Brenda and Bob were divorced. A week after the divorce, Brenda married Don in a small ceremony at a wedding chapel in Las Vegas. Bob heard about it by word of mouth, and although he frowned, he didn't say anything about it to anyone. Bob began working at the new Nissan plant, where he worked 110%. Upper management recognized talent when they saw it, and it seemed like it wasn't long before Bob was promoted to vice president of finance and administration, which included human resources. Bob reported directly to the executive vice president of the region, longtime Nissan employee, Henry Misogi. Henry liked Bob's no-nonsense management style. It was 2 years after the divorce, and things were going very well for Bob. He was good at his job and enjoyed it. He was very pleased with the way his relationship with his boss, Henry Misogi, was working out. They had a deep mutual respect and had become close to each other, each relying on the other's opinion. When Henry asked Bob if he could stop by his office, Bob didn't know what to expect. And he was even more surprised when Henry explained to him that Nissan had purchased the department store chain, whose headquarters were located near Bells, in order to keep it open and viable. Henry explained the situation and asked Bob to evaluate the new business, paying particular attention to the headquarters staff and payroll. Bob took the information back to his office, where they conducted a detailed analysis. They then prepared a set of recommendations, which they presented to Henry. In the end, it appeared that in order to stop the financial hemorrhaging in the business, they would have to lay off about 10% of the management staff and nearly 15% of the hourly labor force. After Henry got Bob's plan, it was time to break the bad news to management. Henry asked all the managers to come to a placemat where folding chairs had been set up. In front were a couple of large tables on either side of the podium. Brenda and Dawn hoped that they would be able to talk to Henry alone before the reorganization was announced. But Henry asked them to wait for Bob. Henry never gave Bob's last name. So when Bob Jackson, Brenda's ex, walked in, Brenda and Dawn almost crapped their pants. They were in shock. Henry couldn't help but notice the look on Brenda and Dawn's faces. Henry said something in Japanese to Bob, who laughed and replied in Japanese as well. Brenda had no idea that Bob knew any other languages. Bob was a simpleton, wasn't he? She was smart enough to realize that the fact that he was speaking Japanese to the executives sent to this country from Nissan Japan was a bad sign, at least for her and Dawn. Henry introduced Bob to the assembled managers as head of administration, which included both human resources and accounting. Brenda sat stunned. When had this happened? When Bob became the man? Where was she when it happened? Yes, Dawn had slept with her. Brenda was so deep in thought that Dawn had to nudge her with his elbow to get her attention. At that moment, Bob was explaining why, if they were fired, they wouldn't get severance pay. This came as a surprise to Brenda and Dawn and the other middle managers, because they knew that when the owners and top management sold the company to Nissan, they left with golden parachutes for themselves. But at this point, there was no money left in the business. In fact, Nissan had to make large cash infusions just to keep the doors open. So the most the laid-off managers could hope for was government unemployment compensation, which amounted to a pittance. Bob also warned the middle managers of the impending layoffs, and that he and Henry had decided to cut 25% of the middle managers instead of downsizing the workforce. When Bob finished his presentation, Henry announced that HR would talk to each manager individually, and then they would determine who to keep. They would be told when and where the interviews would take place, but they should take place as soon as possible. As Bob was leaving, Brenda tried to get his attention, but he just walked out talking to Henry. He didn't even look in her direction. "Shit," Dawn turned and said to Brenda. "Holy shit, that's for sure," she replied. "And it's a resignation at will state," she added with a concerned look on her face. "What do you mean?" asked Dawn. Brenda looked at Dawn, wondering how he could have reached his position and yet know so little about business. "It means they can fire us for any reason or no reason at all," Brenda explained. Dawn looked at Brenda and thought for a moment. "Brenda," he said, "you're gonna have to go back to being the village respecter." Brenda looked at him like he was crazy. "And how, pray tell, am I supposed to do that?" "I don't know. You're the one who set him up. You're the one who has to make things right. Hell, sleep with him if you have to. It shouldn't be a big deal. You had fun with him for years while you were married. But understand, we have a mortgage on the house. We have bills to pay. And if one of us gets fired, we're in big financial trouble, shit. And we won't even get the severance package we were promised." "What bastards?" Brenda looked at Dawn but said nothing. This was another instance where Brenda felt like a whore. Over the last few years of their marriage, if Dawn needed to get someone involved in one of his money-making schemes, Dawn had just foisted her on her like a piece of meat. And when Dawn needed sex, he just took it. He treated her like she was his property. Brenda and Dawn's meeting was scheduled for Saturday. They followed the directions they were given and ended up at a 25-acre ranch. As they pulled into the driveway and pulled up to the house, Brenda and Dawn concluded that Henry must be loaded. When they rang the bell, the door was opened by a sweet little southern belle. "Hello, everyone," she said in the most adorable southern accent. "My name is Pam. Please come in and make yourselves at home." Once inside, they were absolutely delighted. The house looked like one of those mansions featured on lifestyles of the rich and famous. As they walked further into the mansion, they saw co-workers walking around exploring the house. Most of them were having fun. Some of them knew it would be their last days working for the company, but it was a party. The smell of barbecue wafted through the house. Brenda and Dawn spotted Henry and headed straight for him. Brenda said, "Sir, your house is just wonderful." Henry laughed at her compliment. "No," Henry corrected them. "It's not my house." At that moment, Bob walked over and gave them a brief glance, then turned and spoke to Henry again in Japanese. Brenda became very nervous as Bob seemed to look right through her, not even acknowledging her presence. "Bob, what did you just say?" asked Brenda, a little angry at such impoliteness on Bob's part. Henry, however, answered. "He asked if I liked the house. If it's not yours, then whose house is it?" asked Brenda, because she knew that there was no way in the world this huge house belonged to Bob. "Of course it's Bob's," replied Henry, a wicked grin appearing on his face as some people thought he was. Just then, Pam walked up. "Bob, can you tell Jeff to go to the bodega and get another 30 bottles of wine and 5 cases of beer?" Bob nodded in agreement, walked over to the intercom, and began handing out directions. "Pam, you've done a wonderful job remodeling the house," Henry remarked. "Thank you, Henry, you're such a sweetheart. Did you like the new pool we put in?" Henry and Pam headed for the pool, Brenda and Dawn following. When they got outside, they couldn't believe their eyes. There was a lap pool, an Olympic-sized pool, and a grotto. Henry asked, "Pam, if I'm not too nosy, can I ask how much the house is worth?" "About $4 million, Pam answered him very matter-of-factly. "And the house Carrie lives in is about $1.5 million. That reminds me, how's Carrie doing?" "Carrie had another baby about a month ago, and she's so adorable. Every time I see Carrie's baby, I tell Bob we need to start working on getting me pregnant too. Just at that moment, Bob walked over and heard her last remark. He playfully slapped her butt. Baby, we're gonna get you pregnant soon, but right now we need more to ourselves time. For the rest of the evening, Brenda walked around with a stick up her ass. She was doing well, but her fucking ex, Bob, was on top of things. Why didn't I see this coming? Bob's no fool. Well, now he has everything I wanted, she thought bitterly to herself. Don, on the other hand, was having a lot of fun. He flirted with all the women, but his attention was on Pam. Pam was sitting at the table eating when Don approached her. Don flirted and Pam flirted back. But when Don touched Pam, he made the wrong choice, and Pam slapped him in the face. Don got angry and was about to slap her when Bob walked up. Don looked Bob right in the eye and said to him, "Why don't you leave before you get your little ass spanked?" I don't know if you've heard the Jim Krause song Bad Leroy Brown, but as it says, Leroy was like a puzzle with a couple lost pieces. Don got his ass kicked by sleeping with a jealous man's wife. Needless to say, Don didn't have the best night. When the job cuts were announced, Brenda and Don's names surprisingly didn't make the list, but they did have to take a slight pay cut. A year later, Pam finally got what she wanted, twin girls, and a couple years after that, a little boy who looked just like Bob. A year after that, Don and Brenda divorced. One night, Don came home with some guys from work. They hooked up with Brenda. Brenda overheard Don telling the guys, "She was a slut when I met her, so why stop now?" When Don woke up, Brenda was gone. Brenda had left Don a note. All it said was, "Did I leave it for you?" Don didn't care that Brenda was gone because to him, she had never been anything but a whore and a slut anyway. A month later, Don was found dead in the bathtub, both wrists cut to the bone. Next to him lay test results showing he was HIV positive. Brenda began working at one of the company's West Coast stores. She went to Bob's house to apologize before leaving. But when Brenda saw Bob playing in the yard with his beautiful young wife and children, she just got in her car and drove away. Brenda cried for many more days. Many years later, Brenda read an article while lying in a hospital bed. She didn't have HIV, but she had cancer. She was taking chemotherapy, but it wasn't working. It was an article about CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. And it talked about Bob, Pam, their 5 children, and 15 grandchildren. The closest Brenda came to finding another man like Bob was a beagle she named after him. And that's the closest I can come to forgiving the lying whore. After all, she kept her job. Now start next story. Hi everyone. It was unusual for me to be working on a Saturday. The only reason I was in Lancaster today was to placate a special customer. I work for a manufacturing company called Python. We make telephones, not your usual phones, but industrial phones that will work in abnormal or dangerous surroundings. They are sturdy and explosion-proof. Our biggest customers are refineries, factories, oil platforms, and similar harsh environmental operations. Today, I had to solve a small problem at a large grain elevator, and I was already done. I was topping off the gas tank before starting back to reading, when I had a pleasant surprise. "Terry Harrison, what are you doing down here today?" It was Monica Whitmer, an old family friend. Monica and her husband Brian used to live just outside of Reading, and we had socialized on several occasions. It had been a while, and it was good to see her. "Hi Monica, just here for half a day, doing a little work in Mannheim. How have you guys been?" We made small talk for about 10 minutes, and I ended up following her to their house for a family barbecue. Monica was from the coal regions, and Brian and his family were from Lancaster. Most of the people at the gathering were Brian's relatives. I called my wife Darcy to tell her some old friends waylaid me. She and Monica then spent 10 minutes chatting. I felt better letting my wife know I was delayed. It was a non-eventful gathering except for one small thing. I was introduced to Brian's father and 2 brothers, as well as a half-dozen offspring. Each one of them had the same smile, the canine tooth on the right side of their mouth protruded outward, and when any of the men or children smile, their lips would curl up around the tooth in a pixie-like grin. My curiosity got the better of me. "Monica, I need a little help here. Do you need more beef or more ribs?" No, I'm fine. I was just wondering about the unique smile that all the kids have and also Brian and his brothers. Oh, you noticed it's hard not to, especially when you have a whole group of them together. It is a gene thing. Brian, his brothers, and their father all have the funny little tooth in the front. They pass it on to their kids, and their kids will pass it on to their kids. It is sort of cute, don't you think? I smiled and let her get back to her hosting duties. I had a lot of time to think on the drive back to reading. Darcy and I had been married for 20 years. I met her in college and we seemed to click. A few years later, I started work with Python and have been with them for almost 19 years. We have two 18-year-old twin sons, Ron and Rob, who start Penn State in the fall, and a cute little daughter named Jenny, who was 14. We were counting on the boys getting student loans and grants to pay for their college and hoped Jenny would do the same. Darcy and I had a good life, a comfortable house, and two nice cars. I would have vested rights in the company pension plan. In 2 years, and we had a nice retirement account set up. The company had asked me to relocate several times over the years, but Darcy was dead set against it. Other than that, we got along fine. Our intimate life was good, if not exciting, and there seemed to be no problems in our marriage or relationship until now. Darcy had a light supper ready because she knew I would not be able to eat much after the barbecue. She asked how everyone was and expressed her regrets for not being there. Jenny sat across the table eating quietly. The boys were off somewhere doing whatever it was that boys their age did. Everything was okay until Jenny looked up and smiled. Her right lip curled over her protruding tooth, and she looked like a little pixie. I lost my appetite completely and excused myself. From the table, there was no doubt in my mind that Jenny was Brian's daughter. It was about the time that Darcy got pregnant with Jenny that our intimate life and our relationship in general started to cool down. Darcy never denied me intimacy, but the spark and the passion were missing. I assumed it was a natural thing and didn't dwell on it too much. I had gotten used to the mediocre lovemaking and expected it would stay that way for the rest of our lives. I wanted more and would have enjoyed more, but did not want to become a nag about it. Now it all became clear on a different level. From her frequent trips to Lancaster over the past 15 years, I could only conclude that the affair was ongoing. I do not have a confrontational nature, but I felt I would have to mention it to Darcy, and I was hoping I could do it in a civilized manner. Hundreds of other questions started to form in my mind, and by bedtime I was a complete wreck. I told Darcy I wasn't feeling well from all the greasy food and slept on the sofa that night. I spent the whole next day in the garage working on unnecessary projects that I had let go for too long. I was trying to kill time and think. The possibilities were endless. I had to take some action, and it had to result in some sort of satisfaction. I wasn't prone to revenge, but I did want to limit any chance that my actions would somehow benefit Darcy and her lover. My first consideration was taking care of the boys. Even though Jenny was not mine, I still loved her and didn't want to do anything to hurt her. While I didn't want to hurt Darcy, I also wanted to make sure I didn't end up supporting her and Brian for the rest of my life. I knew for a fact that I didn't want to spend any more time with Darcy than I had to. Her reaction at the time of the confrontation would probably determine what I would be doing. In the next few days, I decided the best time would be after Sunday supper. Darcy was a pretty good cook, and supper that night was great as usual. Ron and Rod excused themselves before dessert to go see some friends. Jenny finished her dessert, and after she went to the living room, it was just Darcy and I sitting with coffee. "Something has been on your mind all day, Terry. Want to tell me what it is?" I guess I was being a little obvious with my brooding. I was just wondering how long we were going to wait before we told Jenny who her real father was. I didn't know how else to bring it up. There was a long pause at the other end of the table, followed by a deep sigh. "It is amazing how long it took you to figure it out." She remained stoic as her eyes went from the middle of the table up to mine. "I don't think she has to know until she is at least 18, or she has some sort of medical problem where it becomes necessary. Everything is fine just as it is. We can't accomplish anything by telling her now." "Is that fair?" I asked. "Fair to who?" "A stable family life is important to a girl her age. She doesn't need to know. I'll tell her when the time comes. For now, just keep your mouth shut." I was amazed. I had just told my wife that I was aware of her infidelity, and she ended up dominating the conversation and making demands on me. In my mind, she was supposed to be apologetic and sorry for what she had done. But that is not how it was going. She was acting as if she did nothing wrong, and everything was going to continue as it was, whether I liked it or not. My first reaction was to jump down her throat, but it was about that time that I saw a slight movement. In the hallway by the dining room, Jenny had been listening to our conversation. As I paused, I could hear her scurrying away. I decided to lay back and take a calm approach. Should we consider a divorce? I just said it was important to maintain a stable family environment for a few more years. A divorce is out of the question. What would Jenny and I do if we separated? I think it would be better to wait a while, until she is older and everything is stable financially. Things suddenly became clearer. In 2 years, I would have vested rights in the company retirement fund. In addition to part of my salary, Darcy would also be entitled to part of my retirement plan when she turned 65. The cheating woman was planning ahead, way ahead. I had a lot of thinking to do now. I sat still, saying nothing. At least we don't have to endure the pity intimacy anymore. That is a relief. What are you talking about? For the last 15 years, I have been having intimacy with you whenever you wanted it, so that you would not become suspicious. It went on a lot longer than I thought it would, because you were so damn slow in figuring it out. At least that is all over now. We don't have to pretend anymore. I will probably be taking more trips to Lancaster from now on also. I sat for a few more minutes and neither of us said anything. I'll move my stuff in the guest room, while you and Jenny do the dishes. I don't want to impose on you any more than I have to. You're acting like a spoiled brat, Terry. We can share the same bedroom without having intimacy. It is better for the kids. I didn't reply. The guest room had a sofa bed. That was uncomfortable as hell. But I didn't have to sleep with the cheating woman anymore. I was up and out of the house before anybody else had even stirred. I didn't want to have to answer any questions about the sleeping arrangements with the kids. After grabbing a quick dinner breakfast, I headed for work. I was lying awake most of the night making plans. It would be a busy day. My bosses at Python were more than happy to talk to me. I spent the entire morning adjusting and readjusting arrangements before cleaning out my desk and leaving for lunch. As I was finishing off a large steak sandwich, I realized that I was smiling to myself like an idiot. Things were off to a good start. I spent the rest of the afternoon at the bank, my insurance agent's office, and job hunting. I got home at about 3, which was unusual for me. What the hell are you doing home so early? Quit my job. What? You love that job? Why in the world would you quit? She paused for a second, waiting for a reply. That didn't come. Are you still upset about last night? No, I just decided I was working too hard and wanted to change. I got a new job at DS Brown starting tomorrow. The feed mill? What the hell are you going to be doing working at a feed mill? Loading and loading trucks and freight cars. No hassles and no responsibilities. I am hoping to lose a little weight also. That's the stupidest thing I ever heard of. How are we going to pay for the boys' college? That job can't pay more than minimum wage. I don't understand what got into your head. What happened to your pension? Gone. I needed 20 years to lock it in and didn't have it. Did you get severance pay? How about your vacation pay and sick leave? No, no, and no. In order to get accrued sick leave or vacation pay, you have to give 60 days notice. You only get severance pay when they lay you off. I didn't give notice, just quit and walked out. What about the boys' college? She asked. No problem. The bank will give us a second mortgage, and we can get enough to prepay 4 years. For both of them, they can still apply for some grants or loans, if they have to. And just how do we make the 2 house payments? I figure with the boys gone, the house will be too big for us anyhow, so we will probably end up selling it. You have lost your mind. Darcy shook her head in disbelief at what I had done and walked away. A sense of pride and accomplishment overwhelmed me. My plan was underway. For the next 2 months things got worse between Darcy and me. My relationship with Jenny, however, improved. Jenny had become a perfect little daughter, even though she wasn't mine. I wasn't really sure how much she overheard. The conversation Darcy and I had. The second mortgage on the house. Went through with no problem. Mainly because I had it all prearranged. Every dollar went straight to Penn State. To prepay tuition for Ron and Rob. We could no longer afford the mortgage payments. So the house went on the market. I quietly sold off my gun and coin collection. And stashed the money away in a safe place. I traded in my BMW for a used Ford pickup. So I would have no payments. Darcy and Jenny kept their cell phones. But I got rid of mine and told the boys to get their own if they wanted them. I was barely making enough to pay the utilities and buy food. We had to let the house payments slide until it sold. The bank understood. After the house sold, we still cleared about $30,000. I took the entire check and bought Darcy a new Lincoln sedan. I had checked the blue book carefully. And that car had the highest depreciation rate possible. In 5 years, it would be worth next to nothing. I hope she enjoyed it. We rented a small house in a modest section of town. Darcy was making a lot more trips down to Lancaster. We never talked about it. I was trying to save a little off my salary. But it didn't amount to much. Darcy didn't know it. But all the life insurance policies had been canceled or cashed in. That money went into my secret account also. Jenny and I became very close. She was pulling away from Darcy and becoming more attached to me. I didn't mind. But it seemed to annoy Darcy. The boys were doing great in college. When Jenny's 16th birthday was coming up, I asked her if there was anything special she wanted. She whispered what she wanted in my ear and asked me not to tell Mom. Darcy was absolutely furious when she saw that Jenny had had her right canine pulled. Because of the way it was growing. The dentist was able to remove it without leaving a space where it should have been. There was a small sore spot on her gum where the tooth came out. But he said it would disappear with no scar. Jenny was thrilled. Darcy didn't talk to me for a week. I thought it was a great present. I lost almost 30 pounds at my feed mill job. If the light was just right, it looked like I actually had abs. I think I was fooling myself. But it felt good to dream. The first few weeks I was sore. But as time went on, it felt good to get some exercise. Jenny was in her last year of high school now. And we became best friends. It was her choice, not mine. But I was flattered. Like a bolt out of the blue. Darcy changed from sullen to happy. She was perky and bouncing around like a little girl. I put up with it for a few days and then cornered Jenny. What the hell is going on with your mom? I'd rather not talk about it. She is being disgusting. What does that mean? I asked. She found out 3 days ago that Monica Whitmer has cervical cancer. The doctors say she has less than 3 months to live. Ever since Mom found out, she has been giddy. I think it is horrible that she is getting so much pleasure out of somebody else's grief. Monica never did anything to her. And she is being real about it. It's not nice to call your mother, I replied. I don't know what other name would be more appropriate right now. Unfortunately, I had to agree with Jenny. Now that I knew the source of her elation, I felt the same way Jenny did. It was a struggle to put up with her and keep my mouth shut at the same time. I worked a lot of overtime and spent much time away from the house. Sometimes Jenny would go with me and we would just wander around the mall for hours. We didn't want to go home. 3 weeks later, I was served with divorce papers. Since Jenny was going to be 18 before it was final, child custody was not an issue. We no longer owned a home and had no money in the bank. Darcy did not ask for alimony or support. It was just a straightforward incompatibility divorce. I signed the papers as they were and quit my job at the feed mill. I stopped by the Python offices and then made a quick detour by the bank before going home. Darcy was not at home. Jenny said she went to Lancaster to console Monica for a few days. We both snickered a little at that. I gave Jenny an envelope with $10,000 in it. I apologized that it wasn't more but promised to send some at a later date. I explained that I had to leave and that she would be fine with her mother. She was not happy but helped me pack the truck anyway. Darcy could take care of whatever had to be done about the house after I was gone. I had no idea what Jenny's plans were after high school. Jenny volunteered to tell the twins about the separation, but she said she could not be unbiased. 6 weeks after I left, Monica Whitmer died. My friend Tom Kalita lived in a double-wide modular home by the Ocala National Forest, near Silver Springs, Florida. He actually lived in Moss Bluff, but no one has ever heard of that. He retired from the Air Force, and he and his wife Wanda spent most of their time fishing and going to yard sales. Tom had been after me for several years to come down and visit. It was nice to have a place to go to. I was always fascinated by the fishing shows on TV where they would catch monster fish using ridiculous lures. Tom spent the next few weeks proving it was real. He taught me how to scoot a jiggerbug over the top of the lily pads. It was exhilarating to see the large mouth swoop out of the water after the annoying intruders. It was fun for the first few months, but then it started to get old. I had heard nothing from home, mainly because no one knew where I was. I was counting the days till the divorce would be final. Tom and Wanda were fully aware of what was going on and were very supportive. The day after the divorce was to be final, Tom and Wanda were going to drive me to the international airport in Orlando. I wasn't taking much, so packing was no problem. I left Tom the Ford pickup as a thank you for putting up with me. That was when things took a strange turn. Before we could get out of the driveway, a black SUV pulled in behind us. Tom had no idea who they were. Clyde Green introduced himself and his friend Dave Fielding as FBI agents. "We are looking for Terry Harrison. Can you help us out?" Agent Green appeared to be the spokesman. I didn't say anything but just raised my hand slightly. "Mr. Harrison, we need a few minutes of your time. Can you help us out?" "Of course. No problem." Tom and Wanda gave a small smile to the group and went inside the modular. We all sat down at the picnic table on the front patio. Clyde placed a small recorder and notebook on the table. "Tell us about your trip to Lisbon, Mr. Harrison." "No big deal. I am starting a new job and the job is in Lisbon." "Why at this time?" "I am guessing that you probably know my divorce was final yesterday. I was delaying the new job until after the separation was final." "Is there a problem with that?" "No, not at all. Just trying to verify a few things." "Let's cut the crap. Why the hell are you here and what the hell do you want?" "I have a plane to catch and don't feel like playing cat and mouse." "Get to the damn point." Green and Fielding looked at each other and shrugged. Green closed his notebook. "Brian Whitmer was killed yesterday afternoon by a car bomb. Due to the circumstances surrounding your divorce, we decided it was important to talk to you." "Wow. Great timing." "Well, as I assume you know, I have been here for the last 3 months and Tom can verify that. I have no knowledge of explosives whatsoever, and to tell you the truth, I really had no reason to want Brian dead. As far as I was concerned, he was doing me a favor. I wanted to be rid of the cheating woman and couldn't wait for it to be over. I do not in any fashion resent his affair with my wife. I am a little pissed off that I spent 16 years paying to raise his child but not enough to kill him. The timing, however, is very interesting. We know who planted the explosives and we know it wasn't you. What we need to know is if you paid to have it done, and if you know the person who did it, tell me who you think did it and I'll tell you if I know him." "Do you know a man named Tony Donato from Westchester?" "Don't know anyone by that name. In fact, I don't know anyone at all from Westchester." "Did you guys check the phone logs and stuff? How do you know it was him?" "We couldn't find any records of phone calls to Mr. Donato from anywhere in Florida for the last month. The technique used to set the bomb was very crude but effective. Mr. Donato has used the same setup several times before, but we have never been able to nail him." "What exactly are you trying to find out from me?" "I don't know anything about the bombing. I don't know Mr. Donato, and I couldn't care less if Brian Whitmer was alive or dead. Brian Whitmer was the reason my wife left me, and I thank him for that. No grudges on my part, honest. We just didn't want to leave any stones unturned. You understand, I am sure? Will you be available if we need to talk to you again?" "Most certainly, I will get in touch after I get settled in." For hours later, I was on my way to Lisbon. The plane flight gave me a lot of time to think about the past few years. My relationship with Darcy had been going downhill for a long time. I was too dense to realize she was having an affair. To make matters worse, I had raised her love child as my own. I actually loved Jenny and grew closer to her after I found out that she wasn't mine. Once I realized that Darcy was planning on getting some monetary benefit from my job and my retirement, I decided to take steps to stop it. Python was more than happy to suspend my employment for a few years if I agreed to take over the new European operation. The timing was perfect for the company and me. I had not counted on Brian's wife dying, but Jenny was getting close to finishing school anyhow. My new post as VP of Continental Operations came with a substantial pay increase, a great benefits package, and a reinstatement of my old retirement plan. I had a small nest egg secretly stashed away and all my affairs were in order. I felt bad about not doing more for Jenny, but I could make up for that later. Ron and Rob were finishing up at Penn State and things were looking good for them. I was 3 months behind on the status of Darcy or Jenny, but was hoping to catch up after I got settled. The interview with the feds went faster and easier than I thought it would. I got to thinking that this was unusual but didn't dwell on it too much. I more or less put in the back of my mind with a silent sign of relief. It did get me wondering what had happened though. Getting settled in my new home was a lot easier than I thought it would be. I had underlings now and they had pretty much taken care of things before my arrival. The house, or should I say, the villa they picked out for me was spectacular. It was on a hillside with a beautiful view of the harbor. I was enrolled in language lessons twice a week and had plenty of time for private tutoring. As they say, life was good. For some reason or another, I had not contacted Jenny or Darcy. In fact, no one other than the company and the twins knew where I was. Ron went to grad school at Texas A&M and Rob was now a second lieutenant in the Army, thanks to ROTC. They said Darcy was at the graduation, but no one discussed the separation or divorce. They readily agreed not to let her know of my location. They did not know where she was living or what she was doing and avoided asking. Jenny had told them about everything leading up to the divorce and apparently she had not sugarcoated it. They seemed a little bitter toward their mother. I was proud of all 3 of my children. A year had passed and things were going well. It was early April when I got an invitation to Jenny's wedding. Unfortunately, it got to me about 2 weeks after the date of the ceremony. A small note inside expressed her desire for me to give her away if I got the invitation in time. I felt bad about not being there for her. Took about 2 hours for my assistant to get a current address and phone number for Frank and Jenny Conti and King of Prussia. Hi Jenny, it's Dad. Dad, you got my invitation. I missed you so much. Hey, slow down. Slow down. Everything is fine. I am just sorry that I didn't find out about the wedding till it was too late. I am really upset that I missed it. It was wonderful. And other than you not being there, everything went perfectly. I really wanted you to walk down the aisle with me. Frank is a great guy. Dad, you will like him. He is just finishing up an electrical engineering degree from Drexel, and hopefully he will be starting a new job in a couple months. Jenny was talking a mile a minute. She seemed as excited about talking to me as she did about the wedding. I was happy for her. I didn't get you anything. What do you need or want? I need to see you and have you meet Frank. Can you come home? Not right now, but why don't you and Frank come visit? With me? I have a wonderful place and plenty of room. I can arrange for tickets if you guys can figure out how to schedule it. Okay, that sounds great. Can I call you back tomorrow? Give me a number. I love you, Daddy, and I miss you. I can't wait to see you. I will make this work. Don't worry. Jenny's new husband was everything a father could wish for. He was good-looking apparently, hard-working and ambitious. I liked him and felt that he would take good care of my daughter. Even though I knew Jenny was not mine, I loved her as my own. Jenny was more than willing to update me on her mother. Darcy found herself estranged from Brian's family after his death. They seemed to think that somehow she was responsible for what happened to Brian. There was also some talk about her affair with Brian behind Monica's back that made her an unwelcomed family guest. Without Brian, Darcy had no way to support herself. She was now working at Zinn's Diner by the Turnpike and living in a mobile home near Lancaster. While Jenny was dressing so we could go out for supper, I had some one-on-one time with Frank. Any particular plans after college, Frank? Mainly a job. Jenny has agreed to relocate to wherever we have to go, so that makes it a lot easier. I'd rather find a job I like than be stuck in one I don't like at a particular location. I think I can relate to that. For 10 minutes we talked about what he studied at Drexel and what type work he was looking for. Surprisingly, he spoke pretty good Italian. He picked it up from his grandparents who lived with them while he was growing up in Philly. We were planning on opening a service office in Parma, and the only holdup was finding someone to man it that spoke the language. Experience wasn't as important as education and the ability to manage in this case. I was trying to figure out how to make it work while I listened to Frank talk. Having Jenny close enough that I could see her occasionally would be great. It was good being a boss. About that time, my beautiful Jenny joined us. We were casually chatting as we walked to the car. "Jenny, since I could not make it to the wedding, who did you get to give you away?" Frank's uncle Anthony introduced Frank and I, and he was more than happy to do it. He gave us a very nice wedding present also. Frank sort of laughed at that. I never expected to get a $10,000 wedding gift from anyone, and getting it from Uncle Anthony was a real surprise. It's not like he has a real job or anything. I am not sure where he gets his money, but it sure was appreciated. Well, I must remember to send Uncle Anthony Conti a nice letter to thank him myself. Oh no, he is an uncle on my mother's side. His last name is Donato. I glanced over at Jenny, and she had a small grin on her face like a pixie, but without the tooth curl. And so we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If the story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day. So click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.